Welcome to the Monica Kelly Light Body Podcast. Introducing your host, Monica Kelly.
Hello, this is Monica Kelly, and I'm going to continue giving more storyline about my background so you get interested in this podcast and know a little bit more information about me and where I'm coming from. So I gave you some background about my upbringing, my orientation into Eastern philosophies, my orientation into Western psychology, and then my post-study in hypnosis and negative energy release work. But the story goes on from there because after that point, I really started to develop my psychic and intuitive powers. And it was pretty much by accident, and the story is in its infancy. And I wanted to share that story with you now because as I am developing as a psychotherapist, more and more I am able to tune in to intuitive voices, either my voices or my clients' voices, and I can assist them in finding out all kinds of information. And that's been a really exciting development for me. I'm very happy about that development because of course, I know a lot of yoga practitioners and metaphysic practitioners, and people have come to me over the years, and I've done lots of workshops. And one thing you hear over and over again is, how do I develop my psychic intuition? How do I hear my angels? How do I connect with my higher self? How and when am I going to be able to have those abilities? This is a very common question, and people who are interested in psychic development, if they're not already there yet, are in the process of getting there and are studying. And sometimes they have intuitive hits, and then other times they just wonder about it. Or another example is they have developed one discipline of psychic development, for example, pulling cards, but they haven't really had the experience where they hear their angels. And even in my own development, I've just come into that consciousness, and it's been extremely exciting to have communication with my angels, with my masters, and have access to secret knowledge and secret information that's not coming from a physical teacher or a book, but that's literally coming to me through meditation and through being able to connect with them. So I'm going to just share a little bit about that story and how that developed. So I've been tracking along in private practice, doing marriage and family therapy work, doing hypnosis work, doing negative energy release work, neuro-linguistic programming in hypnosis, and other techniques like that to help heal people, specializing in anger management, relationship counseling, etc. And I was having a really good go about that. It was very fun in developing clients and all of that. And what happened to me was that I had an accident, and it caused a need for a surgery. So all of this was occurring, and when I woke up from the surgery, I remember feeling like I got hit by a truck, like what was that? And I went into recovery, and I had to take some time off. Now, what I didn't realize until probably 6 weeks later is that while I was under anesthesia, I had a near-death experience. I know this now, what happened, but right after the incident, I didn't know. But since I found out that when I went under with the drugs, I literally, my astral body lifted up out of my physical body, went up into the light, went up into heaven or the astral realms, and I had a meeting with my counsel. And they told me a lot of things. And one of the things they told me was, you haven't been practicing correctly or safely these esoteric principles. And they kind of said, no worries on that. We understand. But we're going to start speaking to you directly so that you can tune into us, and we're going to give you the information. Because there's no one really doing what you do or have put it together kind of the way you put it together. So we're just going to start working with you. So I came to know that about 6 weeks after the surgery. About 4 weeks after the surgery, I had a young girl come into my practice, and I do a lot of work with hypnosis in terms of alien regression, people who want to be regressed because they feel like they've had alien encounters and cannot remember them. I also have a lot of psychic adolescents that come to me, and you would be surprised how many psychic children that there are. They're blowing me away right now, the crystalline children. My son, who's 15, is one of those children. He's part of the story. But it's amazing. So I had one of these girls come in, and she was 22 years old, and she didn't really have any money. And she really wanted to do hypnosis because she believed that she had had some contact with extraterrestrials, and she wanted to investigate that in hypnosis. So, long story short, she didn't have much income, and I said, you know what, I'm not going to take any money from you. I'm interested to see what's going on, what's happening with you, where have you been? So I said, no worries on any of that. Let's just not worry about that, and we'll figure out some other kind of exchange. So she said, well, I can do Reiki. So very innocently, I said, okay, I'll tell you what, why don't you do some Reiki on me, and in another time you come to me and we'll see if there's anything there in terms of hypnosis. Well, it turns out that this friend of mine, now friend, is a very powerful light worker and very crystalline. And when she started to touch my chakras, she rocked my world. She shifted me tremendously, and we both knew that was occurring during the session. Now, mind you, in my development over the last 20 years, I've had a lot of sacred experiences with different gurus, with crystals, being in sacred spaces, and this was one of those experiences. This was one of those times where I was affected and shifted, and it was quite instant. And what happened during that session is actually confidential for now, but I can tell you that when I came out of that, I started to be more psychic. I definitely had moved. I was still in recovery at that time and not really honoring my body, and I was working really hard, and I hadn't realized just how much I had shifted psychically. And what ended up happening was I got to a place where I was starting to break. I was starting to have a nervous breakdown, which is something that I never experienced before. But I'd also never had intuitive or psychic notions to such an extent. So what ended up happening was one day I start to hear a voice, and in Western psychology they would call that being psychotic. And this voice was loud. This wasn't like other intuitive voices I had heard in my past after meditation. This voice sounded like it was in the room. And he basically said, he introduced himself. He said his name was Key, and I'm going to spell that Key. He gave me his full name, which is confidential, and said that he wanted to be known as Key, and that he was going to impart his knowledge to me, and that I was to start journaling and writing everything down. And these cute little catchphrases started to come to me, and I was writing everything down, and I thought, wow, this is so cool. Meanwhile, he's telling me things like, you haven't been practicing correctly. In the old days, a master would take a student, and the student would learn everything from that master, teacher, or guru without question. They would follow a program. They would be under their guidance for many, many years. They would have access to the master before they departed from the earth. He said, but you, Miss Monica, you've had dozens of weekend courses over the last 20 years. You've taken all these $500 courses, and you haven't studied any one discipline to its depth. And as a result, you're kind of doing this and you're kind of doing that, and you're not practicing correctly. So we're going to start talking to you. I thought that was pretty tripped out, and he ends up telling me that he's a shaman. There's a lot of storyline here. I'm going to eventually write a book on this whole period in my life, but I will tell you this. I had a young couple come to me for counseling, and I wasn't aware of just how out of it I was. I thought I was just being psychic, no big deal, but I was actually ungrounded. And they came to session, and they turned out to be two young light workers, devotees of Babaji, and they had read my bio. They really wanted someone that knew Babaji, and I had known Babaji through the Yogananda Ananda practice. So, long story short, the male, the guy, says to me, you know, your shaman, he's not dead. Are you aware of that? He's alive. And I said, he's alive. You're right, I'm not aware of that. And he said, yeah, I think he's alive. And I said, I assumed he had passed over, but okay. He said, yeah, he's an Aborigine shaman. He's from Australia, and he's on the earth. So that evening, I went home and I meditated, and sure enough, he says, yes, I'm still alive. And then I kind of said, well, how old are you? And he said, none of your business. And I said, are you in Australia? And he said, yeah. And then I got the intuitive hit that he was getting ready to die, and he was in a lot of pain, and he was holding off dying until he finished working with me and imparting some of his knowledge to me. And with that information, I became very overwhelmed and started to cry. You know, I went to my husband, and he thought I was crazy. He said, you're crying about a person that doesn't exist, that you don't know. And I said, no, I know this person. I can feel this person, and he's alive, and he's waiting to die, and he's in pain. Meanwhile, go back a couple of days, I was working with my son, and my son, who has never been interested in psychic phenomena or hypnosis or any of my work, 15-year-old video game kid, comes to me and he says, Mom, I'm hearing a voice. He says he's a shaman, and he's sending me this information. So I thought, well, that's really interesting. Is your shaman the same as my shaman? And of course, we understood that it was the same entity that was talking to us. So I had just gotten this information that he wasn't dead, that he was alive. So I go up and I knock on my son's room, and I said, hey, you know, our shaman, Key, I was like, he's not dead. He's alive. And then my son kind of checks that out psychically, and he goes, you're right, Mom, he is. And I said, how old is he? He won't tell me. And he says, he's 103. And I said, is he getting ready to pass? And he said, yeah, he is. Now, meanwhile, Key had told me, you need to spiritualize your healing tools. You need to clean up your act. You need to get organized. I'm going to teach you about crystals, which I'd never been interested in before. I'm going to teach you a little bit more about pranic healing, which you know nothing about, in terms of being safe. What is this negative energy? And he really wanted me to do a ceremony in San Diego, and he wanted me to do a shamanistic ceremony. And I'm not going to get into the whole ceremony in this podcast, but I will say at the end of the ceremony, I took my son with me, and it's 9:00 that night, and my son says to me, Mom, answer this question psychically. True or false? And I said, true. The answer to the question is true. And he got really emotional, and he said, Key just passed. He just died. And we both were very overwhelmed emotionally, and it felt like my grandfather had died. Someone very close to me had died. And I started sobbing. Here we are at the beach late at night, just finished this ritual that Key had asked me to go through, one of 3 rituals that I went through over the next couple of weeks to purify myself, clarify my mission, and learn more about all of these psychic powers that had been endowed to me. So earlier that week, Key had me do a painting, and I had buried it under some crystal rock salt, ice cream salt. And he had said, keep this in a safe place, and it was in my car. And so my son said, there's something you're supposed to do, Mom. And I said, I know what I'm supposed to do. And I went in my car and I found that rock salt that was covering this picture. And I went back out onto the sand. I walked towards the waves in tears. There's more story here, but when I finally got to the water, I start throwing the ice salt to the sea. And I understood that this first ceremony was also his funeral, was also his departing from the earth. And that was the beginning of another 2 weeks of being overwhelmed and inundated, not only with Key, but with several of my angels and also other masters that started to come forward, including Jesus, Buddha, Kuan Yin, and others. All right, so I'm going to pause this podcast and continue on a little bit more with this story in the next podcast. Okay, thank you. I hope you enjoyed that story. It's a fun one to tell. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for listening to Monica Kelly Lightbody. For more information on downloads, workshops, and private sessions, please visit www.monicakellylightbody.com.